Okay, I see you now. So what part of Texas are you in?
I'm right next door to Austin, so I'm pretty close to where you're going to be in the spring for South by Southwest. And for those of y'all that are going to be seeing this on the Texas State website, I'm talking with Dr. Jason Jerald, who works on virtual reality and augmented reality, and he's going to be at a panel. And so I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the panel that you are going to be on and a little bit about yourself and the work that you do with virtual reality.
Absolutely. So I'll be on a panel with a few other VR gurus, including Amir Rubin from Six Sense Entertainment and Jan Goetzeluk from, from Birchwicks, who do the omnidirectional treadmills. And I think he's based in either Houston or Austin. So you guys are fortunate to have someone like that in that area. As far as the panel, it's a suspension of disbelief, and Jan is the one who put that together. He kind of brought us together, so he's really the guy to talk to about the vision. But in general, virtual reality, that's what we do. We block out the real world and replace it with an imagined reality that was created by someone, created by programmers, artists, psychologists, engineers. Virtual reality is something that requires all of us from different fields to come together in order to do it really well. That's one of the things that's so exciting about it, is that it's multidisciplinary.
And could you tell me a little bit about augmented reality and what's the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality?
Absolutely. So virtual reality is when you completely replace the real world. Augmented reality is when you add on to the real world. So there's simple devices such as a iPad, or I call it a handheld augmented reality, that use the camera. You can see out through the real world just like you normally do with your iPad or phone or whatever it might be. But because we are tracking where that camera is in position and orientation in real world space, because we know where exactly that iPad is, we can overlay geometry or information onto the real world. So the visual cues, artificial cues correspond to things in the real world. You can go way beyond that and do what we call optical see-through head-mounted display augmented reality, which is a step beyond Google Glass. Google Glass is more of an information display. A true augmented reality system is when you have the see-through glasses, you look throughout the world, and it feels like the information actually is embedded in the real world space.
So you could go to, say, New Zealand or Madrid, Spain, and download the Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings app, and it would superimpose the sets as you're walking up to the hill that had Madrasil, the Golden Hall of Theoden, but it's in this huge valley with this random hill in the middle of nowhere in New Zealand, and you'd walk up to it and be like, oh, I'm here, there, or my interest is space, and so you could, if I'm understanding this, I know NASA's working a little bit on like projecting into a room the landscape of Gale Crater for curiosity.
Absolutely. And there's sort of there's a continuum from the real world to augmented reality to virtual reality. And sort of, I'd say what that you're describing there is something called a virtualized reality, which is where you take real world data and you put it in a virtual reality. So you can collect information from Mars, you can collect it from, somewhere that a human can't go, or maybe it would be as simple as, telepresence for the case of visiting a location that you don't have the resources to be there to visit.
Yeah, Dr. Robert Ballard talks a lot about that for exploring the deep ocean and wrecks and things like that. He's a big proponent of that with the Jason robot. One other question is, so what would you consider to be the most effective virtual reality technology out there right now?
Oh boy, it depends so much on the task. As far as entertainment and film, I mean, Oculus is just doing an amazing job on that with their new kit that will be going public soon, hopefully by the end of this year. This goes beyond the DK2 that a lot of people already have. The new version, the beta, is just it is so good. It is the best VR experience I've had personally, and I've tried quite a few different systems, and it's so well calibrated, it's so well done that you are so fooled into being in this other world. I mean, it's an emotional experience. I mean, people are coming out of these demos, almost crying because they've seen the future of, virtual reality is finally starting to be delivered. So I've been so impressed by Oculus in general, how they're doing everything right.
I've been to the top of the wall in Westeros. Last year at South by, I went to the Game of Thrones thing, and I got in there, and it was really incredible because they had fans and stuff like that blowing cold air on you and things like that. And I personally would love to fly through the Orion Nebula, but anyway. And so, what has been your funnest, kind of along the entertainment thread? What has been the funnest VR experience that you've had? Like, not just so much as the hardware, but like, what was the presentation? What was the one that you enjoyed the most?
Wow, that's a tough one. There's so many great applications out there. I think creating my own worlds is sort of, I won't say that's the best, but that's really just to be able to see something that you yourself have created and be able to add to that, to be able to be immersed to it, to be able to interact with that. But at the same time, it's nice to see other people's work because there's pleasant surprises. You don't know what's coming next, what's around the corner. One thing I tried this summer was a application called Birdly, which is a sort of semi-robotic device where you lay down on a platform and you flap your wings in order to navigate over the city of San Francisco. So you were talking about flying through the Orion Nebula and also the fans in your face. They had the fans in that application as well. And because it had those additional cues beyond just the visual cues or even the auditory cues, it had that sense of touch because you were physically moving your arms, something called proprioception or kinesthetics, where you kind of sense the motion of where your arms are in space. And then the wind being cued via the fans. I mean, it was multi-sensory. And you really need that to go beyond what most people have experienced today. To get that full, true experience, you want to have touch, you want to have auditory, you want to have vision, you want to have everything you possibly can.
And what kind of education potential do you see with this technology? How can it help people teach different types of concepts that are kind of hard to understand? How could this feed into educational for the next generation of students?
So education is big. Right now, it's not quite there yet. Most things are focusing on entertainment, but I believe education has the potential to go well beyond entertainment and be bigger than just gaming or immersive film, which are becoming big right now. I think that's probably a few years off for a few different reasons. Funding issues. There's acceptance. It's more of a traditional industry. I'm currently working on some projects in education, so that's evidence that I'm super excited about it. We're doing some neuroscience education with digital art forms and Sixth Sense entertainment, where we're actually tracking the hands with a head-mounted display. And you can reach into the world and grab different brain parts. You can think of it sort of like the anatomy puzzle that a lot of your viewers, I'm sure, have had in biology class. You can reach out and put the puzzle and feel it physically. Well, in virtual reality, you can add additional, cues. In the real world, you can't normally grab an object and have a video pop up or have, maybe there's a little bit of sound that you could, build into a physical device. But in virtual reality, you're not limited by the content. And so you can give immediate feedback, for example, of, what this object does. Oh, this is the cerebellum. This helps control balance. Or, poke around in the brain and see the reaction of, a virtual body that's affected by that. And I was very surprised. We did a pilot study. This was for kids, grades 3 through 5. And the kids just picked up the brain parts immediately. Within like 3 or 4 minutes, they were able to understand. They learned what the different brain pieces did. the different functionality of the different lobes and such. And myself too, I'm not a neuroscientist, and I'm developing the software, but I'm not specifically motivated by remembering all these different parts of the brain. And so I kind of knew them, but not very well. But once we actually got the game going, and I was playtesting and such, I had motivation to learn these different pieces of the brain and what they did. So within a few minutes, suddenly after many hours of programming, when I didn't learn the parts, suddenly within a few minutes, I had a pretty good idea what the different parts did, because I needed to know in order to go to the next level.
Yeah. I substitute teach, or I used to, and one of my favorite times in a classroom, and just hearing you talk about kids doing it, was we were supposed to get together as a constitutional convention and write our own constitution. And so I kind of mediated the debates that were going on. I could only imagine putting on, some glasses, sitting at your desk, and now all of a sudden you're in Philadelphia and you're in that room where they all debated about, the Great Compromise and all these kinds of things like that. You look down and, you're wearing Thomas Jefferson's clothes or Benjamin Franklin's or something like that, and everybody has their own character to play, and then you get to actually kind of debate it there. Something along those lines would be really, really cool.
Well, that's a very good point of something we call embodiment. So right now people talk about presence in virtual reality as your sense of being there. But right now in most demos, you look down and you're like a floating point in space. You don't see your own body. You add your own body, that really adds a sense of presence. And if you there's actually been studies on this. If you look down and something touches your arm, visually you see, oh, okay, that looks real. If you have actually someone touch that arm in the same place that corresponds to the visual touch, for example, rubbing a feather along the arm as you see the feather in virtual reality, even if it's a different color skin or a different type of body, like you are just suddenly like in that world as if it's you. And that can affect things like empathy. You can understand how it feels to be in a different gender or a different race or, a different body type. And so as far as the potential of understanding and empathy and sort of these traditionally non-technical oriented industries, there's just huge potential there for that.
One of my curiosities in the far-flung future of this technology is, I know when it comes to artificial intelligence, we've learned that having the computers have a mechanism to learn is probably is going to be the way that we do it. So how do you see VR and AR possibly helping AI learn, maybe through like a human surrogate doing things, and they're getting the sensory input of us, and then they learn through us, and that be some kind of computerized empathy? I know I just asked you like 16 different questions there, but how can VR and AR possibly help artificial intelligence be developed?
Absolutely. So computer vision is sort of the inverse of computer graphics. Instead of generating a computer-generated world from a geometric model, you are building a geometric model from the real world. You're analyzing that world and, not just necessarily geometric, but an understanding of the real world. The University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies, they've done some very interesting work of cameras for therapy. So the camera's on the user, so you can see things like changes in skin color, for the posture of the head. You can, very subtle body language cues that even you and I might not even pick up on unless we're trained very well in that. The computer is trained to pick up on those things. I don't know if that's the true definition of AI, because it's kind of, programmed by a person to look at these things. Ultimately, AI will be able to learn by itself. And that, I think, has quite a ways to go, partly because we don't even understand, how the brains work. The best neuroscientists in the world have a pretty good understanding, but how the different components of the brain all work together is a very hard problem. I mean, the human brain is the most fascinating piece of technology ever created, and maybe for the foreseeable future, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so understanding how the human brain works, seems like kind of a requirement if we want to simulate that with AI.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Like I said, far-flung future type stuff.
That's so you say that. So I'm writing a book on virtual reality for perceptual and design, interaction design for virtual reality, and I introduced the perception chapter with exactly what you're saying. Of, we have 100 to 500 trillion synapses in the brain, and I compare that. That's compare it to different things, the number of stars in the universe, the number, what is that distance, those sort of things. So yeah, it's fascinating. The brain is just so amazing.
Yeah, and we're moving forward pretty fast now with neuroscience is getting better and better and better, but I agree with you. We're still a long way off from understanding really our own minds and what consciousness really is and how it manifests itself from these electrobiochemical impulses that are just kind of aggregated together, this titanic number of just things that are all happening in sequence.
And it's different from a digital, binary computer. It's an analog, massive connections. It's not just, on or off of neurons. There's, interconnections between them and stuff. And
kind of on that thread, like looking at special effects over the past few years in film, they've gotten better and better at tricking us. How has VR and AR kind of gotten better at tricking us into our suspension of disbelief?
Absolutely. So there's something called the uncanny valley, which means that as we get better and better with, and this is especially for avatars or human representations in the virtual world, because our brains are attuned to faces, right? We're very sensitive to something that's off in the face. And so if you have a little character with a smiley face that's, kind of bad graphics, it's a cartoon character, you're easily fooled because it's sort of this abstract representation. But as you get closer and closer to being a real human, things start getting really creepy. Like, things aren't quite right, and maybe we can't tell why it's not quite right. Maybe, the eyes are not, don't reflect properly, or, the skin tone is just kind of off. And we may not notice it consciously, we just kind of think, oh, that's kind of weird. So that any value, it becomes tougher and tougher to approach reality. Now, on the other hand, a lot of people talk about that, but then we see movies all the time, and we notice those things that are off, but there's a lot of things in movies that we don't notice because they're done so well. And in those cases, we don't pick those out and say that doesn't feel right. It feels right, so we don't notice them. So Hollywood is doing a great job. It's easy to pick up on the things that don't work, but all the things that do work, in some ways we've already gotten there.
But that's all the questions I really have. I want to thank you again, Doctor, for your time, and I look forward to coming by your panel and checking everything out and hearing about the virtual reality. So for all of y'all, hopefully you come by too if you are here, and I'll give you the last word, Doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. Please come by and say hi, and we'll chat. I'd love to hear your ideas and thoughts on virtual reality.